racial representation in visual media has often been fraught with teething pains, troubling imagery, and outright offensiveness. To look at some of the boldest leaps in what we consider the language of film, it becomes immensely depressing to find just how many of these culturally essential developments were served up alongside unapologetically racist garbage. The Birth of a Nation pioneered any number of revolutionary filmmaking practices. Advanced editing techniques, close-ups and tracking shots, and sprawling 12-reel narratives made up of flashbacks, subplots, and grand spectacle. It also holds the distinction of being one of the vilest pieces of racist propaganda ever released. A film so brazen in its glorification of white supremacy, it almost single-handedly revitalized the flagging Ku Klux Klan. The jazz singer introduced synchronized sound to the world in service of a mammy-singing minstrel show. As synonymous as these both are with their use of blackface, applying dark makeup to create a grotesque racial impersonation, they weren't my first run-in with this troubling practice. For that, we need to look at an annoying yet endearing chap named Johnny Five. As a child, all I saw when watching Short Circuit and its sequel were Steve Guttenberg, a punk rock robot, and the most tragic death scene of all time. As an adult, all I can see is this. That's Fisher Stevens in full-on brown-faced, Indian-accented spectacle.
I have seen some strange, bizarre drivers, but you will be awarded a cake.
This was born of the cocaine-fueled farce of the 1980s, an era that still had serious issues with the portrayal of interracial relationships on screen, but not a worry in the world about depicting the sexual exploits of human beings trying to get it on with a corpse, a fish woman, a duck, or a storefront mannequin. At this most peculiar period of our history, the director of Friday the 13th Part 2 set out to make a light-hearted romp about all-American racism. What we got was more revolting than any horror film you could ever conceive. 1986's Soul Man.
What's happening, brother? Get down, looking good, mama, looking good. Well, I got to be going now.
In Soul Man, Mark Watson has it all. Money, a car, an acceptance letter to Harvard Law School, and a best friend played by the wife murderer from Minority Report. When his dad decides he should pay his own way, Mark does what any wacky teen in need of some quick cash would do. He takes an overdose of experimental sun-tanning tablets and frizzes his hair up to usurp a funding grant reserved for exceptional African-American students. It's at this point I'd like to remind you, Mark is not supposed to be the villain. The antagonists here are his also racist landlord, and the one person who seeks to expose his black-faced pantomime of financial fraud. After walking a mile in the shoes of a person of colour, Mark realises racism exists, just in time to take advantage of two different girls and a whole host of comedy hijinks on the way. There's no getting around the bleach-in-your-eyes brutality of the optics on display. Its reductive reason for existence goes about as far as white man plus brown body paint equals comedy gold. It could be argued it's well-intentioned, with an anti-racist pro-acceptance message buried in amongst all the misfiring quips and catastrophic set pieces. However, good intentions do not make for conscientious art or even elementary social awareness.
You have no idea what my people have been through. What am I saying?
As a comedy, it's neither funny nor memorable beyond its wrong-headed existence. As a satire, it's a rupturing sewer pipe of despicable miscalculation and nonsensical reasoning. Divorcing ourselves from the unavoidable tastelessness of it all for just a moment, let's look at the inherently broken concept. It's a narrative predicated on the idea that there were no black students in the whole of Los Angeles County that qualified for law school in 1986. And it only gets more idiotic from there. The premise requires that not one single person realizes this is just a gangly dork putting on a one-man minstrel show for the Ivy League crowd. Now, if that was the joke in and of itself, then you could potentially find some sharp points of discussion. The idea of institutional bias favouring the admission and allocation of resources to Caucasian students in further education, the monochromatic ignorance of persons of privilege towards the existence and experiences of the African American community, I mean, it'd still be gross, but at least it would be creating a dialogue with its controversy. The reason it doesn't work here is that there are multiple persons of color walking these Harvard halls, and they are all exactly as oblivious to this dipshit as anyone else, thereby taking any satirical intent and mashing it down the plug hole. Two scenes in particular aim to call out racist groupthink, but are delivered in a manner so perversely backwards as to propagate the very same racist stereotypes they attempt to decry. During a basketball game, the two team captains fight over who is going to get Mark on their side, playing on the tired stereotype that all black men are good at sports. The fact Mark is terrible is played like an eye-opening rebuke of this entrenched tokenism, which doesn't make any sense because Mark is white. So it's reaffirming the same old white men can't jump shtick, while also repeatedly showing the star player on the opposing team is the only actual black person on the court. So it's arguing that the stereotype is correct?
What an asshole.
Later, in the most uncomfortable family meal since the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we see these upper-crust wasps' point-of-view impressions of what they associate with African-American men. The mother sees an insatiable savage. The son thinks of a performing caricature of Prince. The father, however, this is what he sees when his daughter entertains someone whose skin isn't white.
Go get my heroin and my hypodermic needle, bitch. Give me some more watermelon while you're at it.
A writer and director callously wielding such pungent imagery all in the hopes of a few giggles is just despicable whichever way you slice it. Even the melanin pill plot contrivance that explains how Mark is able to remain dark-skinned throughout may have been to avoid any unfortunate shots of our hero applying blackface, but more likely it just exists so he can get wet without creating a plot hole. Soul Man is an experience almost devoid of tact.
Can we blame him, ladies and gentlemen, for the color of his skin?
When considering the nuance and weight of these persistent, prescient, and life-altering issues, literally showing the correction of a racial mistake with whiteout fluid isn't going to cut it. The very idea that racism even exists is only acknowledged once it happens to a white man. This is his journey towards the understanding of the hardships and hurdles faced by persons of colour. A lesson learned by actively engaging in hateful racist practices. Taking advantage of the struggles of the marginalised to seek self-improvement is to treat each person of colour as a prop, every slur as a positive learning experience, and all the ugly acts of appropriation as lines on a resume. Mark's punishment for his unconscionable transgressions? He keeps his place at Harvard, receives a bailout from his father, gets the girl, and all at the pricely cost of having to get a part-time job. Imagine Seven ended with the heartfelt forgiveness of John Doe, because the only way for him to learn that murdering is bad was to saw off Gwyneth Paltrow's head. When it was released in 1986, Soul Man was met in the manner you'd probably expect. The NAACP and Black American Law Students Association at UCLA righteously protested its existence, stating, "Soul Man's simplistic attitude treats the problem as if it were merely a matter of dark skin and not of 400 years of diversified culture." It was critically destroyed by the press, who immediately called it out of date, unpleasant, and cataclysmically ill-conceived. While Soul Man is undoubtedly a tone-deaf pisspot that asks us to forgive racism at the behest of its supposed good intentions, this isn't a media topic that died out with the 1980s.
Are you African American?
I don't understand the question.
In a more recent example of life imitating art, former NAACP chapter president Rachel Dolezal was revealed to be white with no African ancestry, which in turn promoted the debate of self-identification on racial grounds. Back in the world of entertainment, Angelina Jolie drew criticism for portraying Marianne Pearl in A Mighty Heart. A woman of African, Cuban, Chinese, Dutch heritage, the discussion becomes more nuanced when considering this was an act of colorblind casting proposed by Pearl herself. Robert Downey Jr.'s Oscar-nominated turn in Tropic Thunder is an often hilarious and to-the-bone send-up of regressive Hollywood entitlement, racially insensitive casting practices, and the often parroted notion of "I'm an actor, which means I can play who and whatever I want," that still can't quite shake the shadow of its excruciating Laurence Olivier in Othello origins. The much trotted out white chicks defense, whereby certain areas of the internet are quick to highlight that a film with offensive whiteface exists, is an odd one. Yes, that's technically correct, but is defending the right to black up really a hill you want to die on? I'm not here to soapbox an agenda or stand virtuous over works that have aged horribly with the march of time. All I ask is that you consider where we are and where this all comes from. An 1830s theatrical practice meant to mock, vilify, and belittle enslaved plantation workers. Maybe rather than arguing whether freedom of expression affords people the right to appropriate these images from an existence they can't possibly comprehend, that time and energy could just be used to make better films. Special thanks to our Patreon producers Jennifer C. and Paul of the Polls, and as always, thank you to these good-looking, good-smelling folks who support us over on Patreon. What's the most egregious use of this practice you can remember in television or film? We really appreciate every one of you who likes, shares, subscribes, and leaves a comment, and if you'd like to support the channel directly, all the while receiving reviews, your name in the credits, and access to the In Frame Out Film Club, consider supporting us on Patreon by clicking the link in the description. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.